Afternoon, everybody. Today we're going to be discussing, well, let's back up a little bit. I'm talking about, those of you who know my posts and know my teaching know that I focus greatly on the American Civil War and Russia, separately, of course, among the many things I teach. And a year ago, I had to be careful because of all the anti-Southern Confederate sentiment going on. So I had to be very careful of how I presented there and what I did and didn't talk about, what I did and didn't say, because that was quickly becoming a slippery slope. And so I made a comment a year ago when I got a brand new World War I Russian hat that I'm going to focus on Russia because nobody gets mad at Russia. So on a completely sardonic note, there's a part of me that will take responsibility for this current mess because I chose to use famous last words on this one. Not making light of anything in the mess over there. It's horrible, absolutely horrible. But just the irony of areas I like to talk about are kind of in this kind of a pickle. So what we are going to be talking about today is with the United States and Russia, but nothing about what's going over there now. Not touching that, not going anywhere near that. What this has to do is things that took place in 1943 to 1945 with President Roosevelt and Joseph Stalin and Winston Churchill as well. Now, I've heard some historians say that Franklin Roosevelt, President of the United States, took the position with Joseph Stalin that British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain took with Adolf Hitler in 1938. Well, both accounts are very much misunderstood. I'm going to break down how neither of them are either credible points of view to have, and they're really not the same as one another. For example, I already discussed with Chamberlain, he was in a very difficult position. Nobody in Europe wanted to go to war. And had he gone back to Britain saying, we're going to go to war, he just would have been cast out of office because nobody would have been willing to listen to him. But I read an account by the former Soviet ambassador Ivan Maysky, who was the Soviet ambassador to Britain from the late 30s to the early part of the Second World War. And he said he had, in the beginning of October 1938, he had sat down with former British Prime Minister Lloyd George. And Lloyd George told him of a conversation that Baldwin had with Chamberlain before he went to the Munich conference, telling him, and putting in my own words, said, you got to make peace by any means necessary. We cannot go to war. We are not prepared for war. If we wind up going to war, if Hitler calls our bluff, if we say we're going to go to war, our people are going to string us up because we are nowhere near ready. And so that's the kind of thing that Chamberlain was sent to the Munich conference with. And some now think, knowing that bit of information, that those were factors in Chamberlain taking a position of give him whatever he wants just so he'll go quietly. So it may not have been so much as cowardice, more focused on the lack of his national preparation. So that's one thing to focus on with that one. Now with Roosevelt, they say he lied down to Stalin during the latter part of the war. You look at the two conferences that the big three met in, Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin. The Tehran Conference in 1943 and the Yalta Conference in 1945. All three of the leaders came to those conferences, both in Iran and on the Crimea, with very specific goals for their nations. You know, Stalin's was to secure his borders by any means necessary. Churchill was, in many ways, to secure the position of the British Empire. And Roosevelt's was a little bit different. He was mostly trying to accomplish was to guarantee Soviet involvement in the continued war with the Japanese once Germany was defeated. Roosevelt really wanted to ensure that the Russians were going to come in against the Japanese in the east and invade Manchuria, which they did in August of 1945. Somewhere it's going to blow over, that wind's picking up. And so they say that Roosevelt lied down to Stalin, saying give him whatever he wants because he's afraid of him, sort of thing. No. In my studies of FDR, and the things I've read about him shows that he was one of the most charismatic leaders we've ever had. And he knew how to talk to people, he knew how to persuade people, and he knew how to get what he wants in a very diplomatic way. From what I understand of Roosevelt was that his position was more that if you kind of placate Stalin with the things he wants now, once the fighting is over, he would have been able to talk to him more and get him to be a little more, how should we say, flexible on several matters. He never actually formally gave Stalin a full green light to do certain things, but he just didn't, he chose not to, how shall we say, antagonize Stalin by getting in the way of what he wanted in that moment. It wasn't necessarily the best policy, but it was more because he was thinking more down the road of will the Russians be able to work with us at the end of the war once it's over. He was thinking more of how things were going to go in the peacetime. That's the major reason why Roosevelt took the, how should we say, much more lenient position, or no, they're not taking the hard-nosed position that Churchill took with Stalin, because it was the, how should we say, the elasticity, as Winston referred to with President Roosevelt, that he had, that helped make things go forward much more smoothly with the big three. But I want to throw it out to you guys now. What do we think on this? Do we think that Roosevelt just lied down? Do we still think that what Chamberlain did was an act of cowardice, or was he thinking about the big picture? What do we think about Britain's position on this one? It's going in several different directions. Let's focus on 1943 to 1945. I really do not want to touch the current crisis over there right now, because that's not what this is about. And I welcome all comments and points of view. Just please remember, my one rule is just to keep it civil and keep it respectable. So there you go.